All right. I have to tell you, after mentioning that I wanted to encourage you to put in some sermon suggestions or passages and those kinds of things that had been empty for a while. I don't know if it just happened since last Wednesday or if I just had missed out on a few, but I had 11 by Sunday. So that was great, though. I'm very encouraged by that. And I had so many texts that were given to me that tonight's lesson will just be solely texts that you gave me. And so I won't even have time to get to all of them, but some of them were sermon suggestions, and so they'll be at another time. But I'm going to try to address as many of these tonight as I can, and I love that. I appreciate it, and it's been a blessing and a challenge to study and to better understand and answer the questions that have come up. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to begin in 1 Timothy chapter 5. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 1. If you have your Bibles, and I hope you do, turn with me there. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 1. As you get there, someone that is willing, read that passage for us, and then I will mention to you the question, and we'll answer it together. 1 Timothy 5 and verse 1.
Rebuke not an elder, but entreat him as a father, and the younger men as brethren.
Very good. Rebuke not an elder. The question is, what does it mean not to rebuke an elder? And does this have reference to an elder in the church or an elderly man? Very, very good question. 1 Timothy 5 and verse 1. Now, as with any text in the Bible, if we want to better be able to understand them and to know exactly what they're referencing, or at least to have a better chance to, what do we need to do? Context, that's right. We need to read around it, to read on, to read before or to read after. In this case, it was going to behoove us to read a few passages past verse 1. Again, chapter 5 and verse 1 says not to rebuke an elder, but to entreat him as a father, and the younger men as brethren. He then says the elder women as mothers, the younger as sisters with all purity, honor widows that are widows indeed. Okay, so as we've just reading those three verses, we already get an idea of kind of what this context is about. What kind of individuals is this referencing? That's it. That's right. We're talking about different age groups of individuals. Do you think this has reference to the overseers, the elders of the church, or those which are aged men? Aged men, absolutely. And we know that, first of all, because at the end of verse 1, we read not only about entreating them as a father, but also entreating who as brethren? Yeah, the younger men. The younger men as brethren. And so you see these categories in the context of age groups. The word rebuke here, let me make sure I'm caught up. Did I pass it? I didn't even know. And bear with me on this because we're in a transition period here. I've been working on this today and trying to get this thing wireless, and it has given me some trouble, but I think we'll be all right. I'm not quite wireless yet, but we're going to get there, Lord willing. An elder is an aged man. The word rebuke, this is what I was looking for. The word rebuke here is an interesting word. When you read this, and it says not to rebuke an aged person, you might get the idea that what he's saying is you don't need to tell someone older than you that they may have sin in their lives. Let's say you witnessed someone that's older than you. Maybe, let's say myself at 28 years old, let's say I ran into someone that maybe he's in his 60s, and I witnessed him say something that he should not have said. And so based on this passage, we might get the idea that I would have no authority to say to him, listen, that was not okay. I'm disappointed that you said that, and try to encourage him. However, this word rebuke is not the word that you often see. In fact, you never see it outside of this passage. And again, one of the reasons I love that you're submitting these texts is because I learned so much in studying this. I had no idea that this was the only time the word rebuke is used, this word for rebuke, is used in the entirety of the New Testament. And the word literally means to pound or to break or mold someone with harsh words. I picture some of you ladies and maybe guys as well. You know that, in fact, we had one at the Walkers when we were there Sunday night. One of those, what do you call it, where you beat the chicken with that metal or wooden Tenderizer, yeah, one of those, like you're beating that's kind of the idea here. You're beating them with words. This is not a pleasant word. You're not encouraging them. You're not admonishing them. You are being very disrespectful to them. Why is it that Paul would say that you need to not be disrespectful to someone who is older than you? Why would that be important? Okay, yeah.
God wants us to respect and fear and honor Him, and we learn from our elders, and we need to start here at home.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It really is. I believe it's just that simple, right? Even from a young age, you're growing up and you're learning from mom or dad, and hopefully you're learning from them to respect those that are older than you. And why is that? Why is it important to respect those who are older, especially decades older than you? Why would that be significant?
Because they've been where you are.
Exactly.
Never been
Where they are, exactly. They've experienced it. They have more experience than you. You know, there may be things that you know that they don't, sure, but experience and wisdom is going to be on their side, not on yours. And so he says to treat them not as beating them with words, as if you were a parent almost disciplining a child. Chastising is another translation even for that word rebuke there. But entreat him as a what? As a father. As a father. Now, does that verse imply then that a younger person cannot discuss the sin of an older individual? No. But he's saying when you do it how? Respectfully. Absolutely. That's the context, I believe, of what's going on in 1 Timothy 5. Now, this was not in the question, but I think it will help to even better answer it. Jump down to verse 17. It's interesting. In this same chapter, Paul's going to get to the actual overseers, the elders in the sense of the select few that are overseers of the congregation. Chapter 5, verse number 17, beginning. He says, "Let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially they who labor in word and doctrine." Now, how do we know contextually that in verse 17 we can already be pretty much certain that this is overseers and not aged men? Why?
They're the only ones that have rule.
Rule. That's the key word. They're ruling there. Also, just on a side note, I think it's interesting. He mentions there getting double honor, especially those who labor in word and doctrine. What does that imply? These particular elders, yes ma'am. Okay, pastors, in really in every sense of that term. What does a pastor do? Okay, watching over the sheep. And also, what is the second and just as important role of a pastor? In the sense of what that word literally means. Guide, to teach, that's right. In other words, we're talking about here about elders who are also laboring in preaching. How many of you know of an elder who is also the minister of a congregation? Anybody ever heard of that? Yeah, I as well, absolutely. Certainly, I cannot imagine being both the elder and the minister of a congregation. Certainly, you could see why Paul would say they that do such and do it well should really be granted a double honor in that sense. And so in that context, he says in verse 18, "For the Scripture says, Thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, and the laborer is worthy of his reward." There you have the authority for what in verse 18? Paying him, that's right. Paying him, absolutely. Okay, verse 19. Here's, I guess, the key text in connection with verse 1. "Against an elder receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses." And so we know what this elder is because of the context. We're talking about the overseer elder, the shepherd, the pastor, the leader of the flock, or the leaders, I should say, the multiplicity of them. And so, in verse 19, what does this imply about an individual who wants to bring an accusation about an elder?
Has to be more than one person.
That's right. Has to be more than one witness in this. If I see one of our shepherds doing something they should not, and I want to... Now, by the way, what does he mean when he says bring an accusation there? Did I just put it up there for you? I did. Don't look. Bringing an accusation. It's just like the word sounds. It's a judicial term in the courtroom. You're not going to bring a charge, an accusation, upon an elder unless there are 2 or 3 witnesses. If there are 2 or 3 witnesses and that charge is brought, then in verse 20 he says, "Them that sin, rebuke before all, that others also may fear." The word there, rebuke, is the word that you most commonly see translated rebuke. It's not the word that you see in verse 1. Again, that's the only time you see that Greek word in chapter 5 and verse 1. Chapter 5 and verse 20 is the word that means admonish. We're talking about admonishing, revealing a fault in the correct manner, and really the way that chapter 5 and verse 1 is implying that you should. So this is a respectful rebuke. And so, true or false, the congregation, or at least 2 or 3 individuals, have the authority to address the sin of an elder, if that is public and clearly is going on. Absolutely. Right? Yes, sir.
Is that any different than Matthew 18, where if you have a fault against a brother, you go to him, you can't resolve it, you get 2 or 3 witnesses, and then tell it to the church?
Good. That's a good question. There is one difference. According to Matthew 18, true or false, you may address the sin of an individual without 2 or 3 witnesses to begin with. True. And that would be the difference. And so, for me, based on what I'm reading here, and correct me if I'm wrong, it appears that you would not be able to adhere to step 1. You would have to go directly to step 2 in this case when it's an elder, which is an interesting concept. Why do you think that is? Why would it be that with an elder, you couldn't just go to them if they sinned against you? Why would you need 2 or 3 witnesses?
Position and authority, he's a ruling body.
Okay.
Decisions for the flock.
Okay, good. His position is authority. And why is that? I think you're right on cue here. Why is that?
Just go to him respectfully because of his position.
Okay. I agree with you. Yes, ma'am. And then Jeannie.
Well, he could also lead others astray. And if you have witnesses that you bring it up, then, that may prevent other people from following after.
Okay, good. Good. That's a very good thought. Jeannie, yes, ma'am.
My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is saying that against an elder receives not an accusation. Say someone comes to me and accuses an elder, comes to me, it's different from me having something against my brother or sister, personally going to them and saying, well, you heard me, and then I bring 2 or 3 witnesses if you don't want to listen. But I understand it's saying that if someone comes to me and accuses an elder, then I shouldn't listen, they should have 2 or 3 people.
Exactly. That's very good. There is. That's a very good observation. And that is a difference here as well. It's not just a situation where someone sinned against you, but a sin that's more in general here that's brought up. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and what it implies is that when you have this case of an elder, the burden and the standard of proof is higher, than it is when it's a member to member. And the reason for that is there's much more at stake. Most of the time, a lot of times, that person who's bringing the accusation is probably not going to be as mature in Christ as the elder would be by definition.
Right.
So you have to have a higher burden of proof. So you can't have frivolous complaints and accusations. That's why the burden is high.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really what I'm looking for. All of those are good points, and the stakes really are higher. Can you imagine the kind of effect that has on a congregation when, not that it doesn't hurt the congregation when anybody is in sin publicly, but when it's one of your shepherds, one of your leaders that you're looking to, that you're trusting in to guide you, and you find it, there's a lot more at stake than in that sense. It's not that they are superior necessarily to other souls, not the case at all, but the implication is very true.
But we're talking about accusations.
Right.
Which may or may not
Be true. Exactly.
So if I go get 2 or 3 other people and say, hey, and I had a member do this one time, saw an elder at a baseball game drinking a Coke across the stadium and said, I saw brother so-and-so drinking a beer. Well, he could have cleared that up very quickly by talking to the elder.
Yep.
But if he gets 2 or 3 individuals that say, hey, I saw him drinking a beer, then you've got a mess to clean up.
That's ultimately what this is. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about here. That's the accusation, the indictment, as it were.
Since this text is all about rules for the church, do you think this double honor means an honor on
Okay, that's a very good question. Let me ask the congregation before I give my answer to this. Based on what we're reading, the context, what do you think? Do you think that, that's an excellent question. The double honor, is that a reference to something on earth? Or would that be something that God is referencing for them in heaven?
I think in the present, in the here and now.
Okay. What would...
Honor just by the actual position. And then it would also be honored, in a way that you would financially support them in that way. So there's double two ways that they're being honored.
Okay, good, yeah. Makes sense. Anybody else? I think that's pretty much it. What I'm thinking along those same lines is, based on this context, with the financial aspect in the context, I would think that it would be in the present. That's not to say that there aren't indications, and we've talked a little before about heaven and about degrees and that sort of thing, and I don't want to open that back up again tonight. But here, I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think we are talking about something in the present. In particular, honor from the congregation in the sense that the respect of what he's doing, both teaching and, especially, he says, those who are teaching and serving as a shepherd, as well as the financial aspect there in verse 18. Very good. Anything else before we move on? I don't want to, just because we have 4 or 5 of these doesn't mean we can't postpone them. I don't want to move on if you have more thoughts. I enjoyed the discussion.
Did part of this come from the fact that the Judaizing teachers said that Paul really was not an apostle?
Yes.
And that as a minister, they were reluctant to provide his financial assistance.
Yes, it is, and that's...
And that's where the ox treading out...
Exactly. And you see him have to address this several times. When he's talking to the church at Corinth, he's having to go over it. And in fact, another text that we may or may not get to tonight, but 2 Corinthians 10 especially, you see this about these false apostles, these people claiming to be Paul. In fact, if you've ever studied some of his first letters, like 1 Thessalonians, I believe, is one example where he does not sign it, give his salutation at the end of it, but you see him do it in 2 Thessalonians, if I'm remembering the correct book. And he explains that he's having to start putting his signature, so to speak, on the end of these letters because these people are claiming to be him. They're claiming to be Paul, and they're teaching and sending letters that are false. The church at Corinth had to deal with that especially. And certainly that's in the background here as well, I think. That's a very good point. Anything else? Very, very good. All right, let's keep going. Next passage, Hebrews 13, verse 17. And obviously I chose to do this one next because this is also about elders. We're picking on the elders tonight, apparently. Hebrews 13. Now, what does that say as to why all these questions were about elders? Now, Hebrews 13 and verse number 17. Can you please explain the scripture, Hebrews 13:17, in regards to participating in works and activities that the elders of a congregation put in place for the congregation, such as vacation Bible school, gospel meetings, involvement groups, dinners, etc.? Do the members have an option to participate or not participate? Will they be in violation of this passage if they do not? All these questions are very good questions. This one is of particular interest to me because I recently dealt with this at Airport Road with some individuals. But let's look at this and we'll talk about it. Hebrews 13 and verse 17. Someone read that for us that is willing and is turned there.
Obey them that have rule over you, and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls, as they that must give account, that they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you.
Very good. First of all, in verse 17, obeying and submitting could be in reference to elders. It could also be in reference, now again, not the context here, but just in general, obeying and submitting could also be in reference to what? Could be in reference to God. What else on earth are we to submit to and obey? Sorry? The land, the law of the land. Is that what you said? Yes. Civil authority, that's exactly right. Could be a spouse situation. So obey and submit can apply in a lot of ways, but we know that this is in reference to elders. Why? Okay. Because they watch for your souls. That's the key phrase. Again, the reason I ask that is just contextually studying and learning these things, and they knew that in the question. I'm just making an observation and just a great study habit. And when you see these contextual clues that help us know, we're talking about elders. And so with elders, he says to obey them, these elders, and submit yourselves. The word obey is a bit deceiving. It's not the normal term there for obey. In fact, it's normally translated trust or believe. And the idea is that you're following someone because you're trusting in them. The word submit is the key word here when it comes to yielding or surrendering to the elders. And so his point here is basically you need to listen to, you need to submit to, you need to follow it with trust and respect your elders. When they ask you to do something, you should do it. Of course, the necessary inference is what would be a case that you would not have to submit to an elder?
False doctrine.
False doctrine, that's right. All right, now I don't know, I may be opening a can of worms, but since this question was asked, I'll ask you this. Do you have to do, or do we, or must we obey everything that the elders ask us to do that is within the bounds of the Bible? In other words, there may not be a passage in the Bible that says we have to do it, but if the elders require it, do we have to submit to that? Seeing some head nods. What do you think? Yes? I hadn't seen any no's. Okay. All right, if the elder said to you, that, and this would never happen, but if the elder said to you, this Sunday you have to all park on that side of the building, all right? Would you have to park on that side of the building? Yeah. Yes. Well, if you didn't, and you parked on this side of the building, would that be sin? Yeah. Okay. Well, this is the question that we're getting at, right? Now, it's just, let me make this observation, and then we'll go a little further into this. This reminds me of, I think a great parallel is the wife who is married to a unbelieving husband. Now, don't misunderstand me here. This is if, let's say we had an elder who was asking you to do something like that. Okay, we don't have that here. But if you're in a situation where an elder is overusing his authority and asking you to do things that are just, there's just no point in it, well, it's kind of that same parallel. Does the wife have to obey the unbelieving husband? Okay, good. I'll tell you what, pause for just a minute, because I think this is going to help bring clarity to this passage, and turn over to 1 Peter. Only because of some of the answers I heard, I just want you to see this text, and so you know where I'm coming from here. 1 Peter 3 and verse 1. Keep your finger or marker at Hebrews if you'd like.
May I respond?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
An unbelieving husband.
Okay, do you have to listen to him?
As it relates to the scripture, I am in submission to him, but if he tells me over and over again, honey, stay home from church, I'm not going to agree with that.
Very good, very good. So you would say, I've got to submit to him unless...
It is a contradiction to the Bible.
Exactly, and that's what I'm getting at with an eldership. Now, look at 1 Peter 3 and verse 1. Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, that is the husbands, they also may without the word be won by the conversation or behavior of the wives, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear. So by you listening to them, even though they're not Christians or believers necessarily, by obeying them, assuming they're not asking you to do something that's in violation of the word, you are, ultimately, your goal is to bring them to the Lord. And so you are to submit to them regardless. And so with that in mind, I think that's kind of the parallel here. If an elder is asking you to do something like park on that side of the building, even though it may seem ludicrous, we have to submit to them. Now, who's going to be held accountable for that decision to make everybody park on that side of the road or building? The elders, right? But we still have to submit to that. Yes, sir.
It would depend on why you ask them to park on that.
Right.
I mean, if we've got a tree that's about to fall, and we say don't park over there, that ought to be obvious.
That's a genuine. That's right. That's exactly right. And when I say they won't ever do that, I mean, of course, they won't just use their authority to just be controlling and say, for no reason, park over here. I'm just throwing out a random example.
That same issue came up with regard to the government when they asked Jesus about the payment of taxes and so on.
Yes.
He said, you render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are
That's
his.
very true. Very, very true. Very good point. Now, as this relates to Vacation Bible School and those kinds of activities. Let's start with Sunday morning worship for a moment, and then we'll lead into the rest. Sunday morning worship, do we have to be at services on Sunday morning worship? If we can be and we're able to be. Yes. Why is that? How do we know that that is required of us? Okay, good. There's plenty of text on that. All right? There's not much debate on that. Several passages that discuss that. When you're assembled together to worship, Hebrews 10, and not to mention all of the emphasis on the Lord's Day, Jesus' resurrection on the Lord's Day, the apostles met always on the Lord's Day, beginning in John 10. Even before the church, they were already meeting every Lord's Day. We're commanded to give every Lord's Day. So for all of these reasons, we know we need to be there. Oh, yes, sir. That's right. How are you going to partake of the Lord's Supper in company, in the assembly, if you're not here? How are you going to give? Now, you could say, I'll send a check, I guess, or I'll do it from home and watch TV, but that's not being with the assembly, Hebrews 10:25. Now, that aside, what about Wednesday night? Is there a passage in the Bible that says or any indication that the apostles were meeting every Wednesday night, or that the Lord would require that of us? No. So let me ask you this. Would it be sinful to miss services willfully and purposefully on Wednesday night? Okay. Well, Jesus didn't say you had to do it, so why would it be sinful? Okay. Yeah, okay, good. Because you're violating, unless you're at a congregation. Now, I don't know, this may exist, but if really the answer to this question is not a universal answer, because I'm not talking about Wednesday night. I'm talking about the question of the elders. Because some elderships, there may be elderships that say, for example, Wednesday night service is optional. For whatever reason, I don't know why they would do that, but there may be an eldership that did that. There may also be an eldership that says, we're going to get together for a fellowship meal. Right? There are no spiritual activities. We're just going to get together and eat. Maybe it's a Christmas party or something. And the elders might say, you must be there. It is not an option. All right? And so you've got different scenarios based on the eldership. So the answer to this question comes down to your elders. Do your elders do they expect you to be there Wednesday night? Now, we know the answer to that question at this congregation. Do they expect us to be here? Absolutely. In fact, I think it was Larry just recently that got up and talked about the importance of wanting us to be here. Now, VBS, gospel meetings, involvement groups, dinners for friends and visitors. The answer to that question, am I in violation of Hebrews 13 if I'm not here, is based on how the elders address that. If the elders expect you to be here, it is their desire that you're here, and they don't present it as an option, then yes, you're in violation. If the elders say, we're not really worried about it, just come if you want to, we don't care, then you're not in violation of this particular text. Okay, are you with me? It really just comes down to our elders. Now, I'm not going to put them on the spot and make them answer to every one of these situations, but what we can be sure of is that if we're not here Sunday night and Wednesday night, we are violating this passage. I would suspect, and correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, but I would suspect gospel meetings, vacation Bible school, if we're willing and able, I would think that they would expect us to be here for those kinds of things. Christmas party and that, I'll let you can talk to them about those things. I won't speak for them, but that's what it comes down to. It comes down to your elders and what they expect of you. And again, if they're asking you to do something that's not necessarily commanded by God, but it's not unscriptural for you to do so, then we need to submit to that. And certainly if we do not, we'll be violating to that. And if they ask us to do something ungodly, they'll certainly be held accountable for that. Well, isn't it such a blessing to serve under elders where you don't have to worry about that? Everybody's human, and anything, I realize that things can happen, but so far, as long as I've been here, you're kidding me. So far as long as I've been here, it seems that that's not an issue here. Surely that was a mistake, right? Glenn, and then Carlos.
I would answer some of the questions that not biblical answer, but do I need to go to vacation Bible school, gospel meeting? Are you looking for a reason to do it, or are you looking for a reason not to?
That's a good point. It really is. It's about that attitude, and the Lord knows that. He knows our heart. He knows if we're just trying to get out of it, or if we want to be here and would if we could. And keep in mind, when we talk about attendance, we're talking about violating when, somebody that's sick and cannot make it. We're not talking about that. We're talking about somebody who could be here and just willfully chooses to watch some TV instead of being here to serve God and in that capacity. They're violating that scripture if the elders expect you to be here. And there are other scriptures that you violate anyways, but we're just talking about this one right now. Carlos?
And I want to also balance the equation, on the to obey and submit. Elders are instructed that they are not to lord it over the flock.
That's right.
And elders have a lot of discretion. They have a lot of power, but they also have a lot of discretion. And so they have to search within themselves to see if they are, ruling in an oppressive way. It may be that they can do that without telling anybody to do anything that's wrong, simply because of the discretion and the power that they have. So they may not necessarily be telling somebody to do something sinful, but if they are using their power oppressively and indiscriminately, then they find themselves lording over the flock.
Yep.
And that you can't do that either.
That's right. That's right.
So it's a balance to it. So everybody has to have the right attitude, flock and elders. That's
right. It is. It's a team effort. It's a congregational effort, and that's exactly right. Any other thoughts on that? I hate to start the next passage because I feel like we've only got about 3 minutes. But any other thoughts on this or anything pertaining to it? Yes, ma'am. Right.
So, that's an option.
Yes, that's optional if you want to volunteer. That's a good point. That's a good example of an optional situation when they say if you'd like to volunteer. And again, I love that Glenn brought that up because the heart really plays a role in here. Do we want to be here? Do we want to be involved, or are we just trying to get out of it? Are we doing the least that we can do and try to just slide in the pearly gates, as it were, or are we being a living sacrifice as God would have us to be?
And as members, I'm saying all of us, we have to look beyond certain things and always see Christ. So if you're in a flock and you have congregational elders, you're looking at the elders, but ostensibly what you're doing is looking through the elders to see Christ on the other side of the elders, because that's really where the authority is coming from.
Very good. That's exactly right.
If you just look at the elder without that dynamic, then you probably are going to miss the boat.
Yeah.
Not only with your attitude, but with your execution, everything about you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Reminds me of Hebrews 12 and verse 1, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. He's always should be in the forefront, and we should see him through the elders. I love that. Very good. Miss Marilyn? Yes.
Elders have a lot of responsibilities and sacrifice
Yes.
for their families. So that needs to be considered too.
That's right. That's very true. There's a number of reasons that we ought to be patient and respectful to our shepherds. Not to mention that the very fact, assuming they're biblically qualified, there's a reason that they are, in that boat. You think about those qualifications, and really outside of, being the husband of one wife and having children that are in subjection, pretty much, and I may be missing one more, but the rest of the qualifications are really just qualifications for who? For a Christian, just a child of God. Not a novice. That would be the other one. Not a novice. He is to be, and a new Christian would not be a novice. But I think that's very significant. Larry?
I think the real key to this passage is in the last part of it, which says that they may do it with joy and not with grief.
Yes.
What a joy it is to see every member here on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And what a grief it is to know that there's some people who ought to be here who are not here.
Yeah.
Or people that just say, hey, I don't care what they say, I'm not going to do that.
That's right. That's a great point. You get that picture here of, and we'll conclude after this thought, this picture here of the elders standing before God, and they're going to give an account for every member of that flock. And they're going to go down the line, and Jinky Moody, let me tell you, I'm proud to tell you about Jinky Moody, because Jinky Moody was always there. He was faithful, in his service to me, and they give that account with joy. But on the other hand, Billy Joe Bob over here, I'm sad to tell you that Billy Joe Bob, we couldn't count on him. He was never here, or he was letting us down in this or that way, and so that's such an important part of this passage that we don't need to overlook. Very, very good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your thoughts and suggestions in the discussion tonight, and I appreciate the sermon suggestions that you put in and text, and I'm looking forward to continuing those next week, Lord willing. We'll pause for a few moments.